Okay, today's video is going to be on loneliness as a disease. As I'll go over, loneliness, or chronic loneliness and the loneliness epidemic has many, if not all, of the characteristics that one would normally associate with a disease. I'm also going to go over a few more personal stories, not too much anything weird, but it relates to this stuff, I promise. A lot is said about how loneliness harms mental health, but people don't really talk about it other than the one you're familiar with, that it's like as bad as smoking a pack a day or whatever, but it is exactly. But people don't talk about as much about how loneliness also harms physical health. Again, just like a disease does. So, I was reading a bit in this book called The Myth of Normal by this guy. He's a doctor, so is Dr. Gabor Mate. And here's a quote from the book, which I do plan on reading all of eventually, but, well, we all know how that goes with reading books these days. On page 66 to 67, he said, "Married people have lower rates of mortality than their age-matched single counterparts, whether the latter were separated, divorced, widowed, or never married. Single people showed an elevated risk for heart disease and cancer, for infectious diseases such as pneumonia and influenza, and for such life habit-related conditions as cirrhosis of the liver and lung disease." Now what Dr. Mate is saying here is that it's that loneliness doesn't just make you want to drink yourself to sleep and smoke and smoke and smoke, but in and of itself it directly harms physical health on top of those things. Here's another one from page 67. "Interpersonal biology also accounts for why loneliness can kill, especially in older people separated from pleasure, social connections, or support. A vast review of multiple studies encompassing more than 300,000 participants concluded that the lethal effect of deficient interpersonal relations is comparable to such risk factors as smoking and alcohol, and even exceeds the dangers posed by physical inactivity and obesity." Now, this is just for older people. I mean, it makes sense that this is what we have a lot of data on. It's a common thing for a lot of older people, especially out in the country, who don't have any family left out there. When they say they're farmers, they can't work anymore. It's a lot. You see a spike in suicide rates in these people. Again, we don't have data for this yet because we just haven't had enough time yet. But we will definitely see it. What about us, people who will likely have this risk factor compounded over decades throughout the rest of our lives? You know, if loneliness is that detrimental to people who presumably had the rest of their lives pretty normal and at least had partners at some points in their life, what is that going to mean for us, that constant risk factor wearing away at us for the entirety of our lives, really? I've talked about the loneliness epidemic before. I've talked about the death of social spaces, the replacement of real human connection with apps, and how de-industrialization and the myth of the free trade, making us all better off, all leads to this huge loneliness epidemic that we're seeing. We've really seen a complete destruction of social spaces. I've mentioned this in previous videos again, but this is one of the biggest factors. And we've seen real human connection replaced with fucking dating apps and social media. When people like us try to explain how difficult it is, we are offered, again, let's talk about this before, solutions that assume we're land whales that don't shower or that we just need to get out there. Again, as I've said multiple times before, there is no out there left to get to. There's no hobby clubs that aren't just 95% or more fucking boomers, if they exist at all. And if you live in some boomerville or some nothing area, there's even maybe not even that. And unless you can afford to go to the city and pay $1 billion in rent, and even then, more and more the pressure is for things to be just done online, and just crushes down such a fundamental part of the human experience into all these superficial things like these dating apps. You can't really get personality to play into. this is the normies will say, oh, maybe you need to work on your personality. Well, it literally doesn't fucking matter on these apps because it's just some short bio and some pictures. It's basically geared so the looks and status are the only things that matter because it's really the only things on display on there. These pieces of advice to get out there and just work on yourself all sound too familiar to us. You know the type of morons who think that Jeff Bezos worked 5 million times as hard as you, or more productively. Again, this is just replacing work harder with more productively and treating it as if it's an argument and as if Jeff Bezos ever produced jack fucking shit. This is just the poor people didn't work hard enough argument, just recycled and applied to dating. Applied to romance. We can see the damn fucking data, as I've talked about. My very first video is called The 27 Epidemic. It's about that graph that hopefully most of you have seen by now. 27% of men aged 18 to 30 haven't had sex at all in the last year, and I know that that's about way more than just sex. Please don't think that I'm trying to condense this and adjust that, because that really isn't it for pretty much everybody affected by this. It's not about the sex, it's about the connection. When loneliness rises, so does suicide and depression. And it's no surprise. You shouldn't need a fucking study to conclude that loneliness, that being chronically alone for this long, is so detrimental. It's not like people suddenly changed and decided to be smelly and lazy. That's as dumb as assuming that like when the Great Depression happened, that people just decided to stop working as hard. The problem isn't that people stopped showering or stopped working out or can't approach people as well. The problem is that our social spaces have been destroyed, and the apps that filled the void left by them flatten what used to be complex social interactions down to superficial characteristics. The fact that it's now fucking commonplace to have memes about, oh, he was a something out of 10. This shows the depths of the decay in our society. As if you could compress someone's entire fucking self-worth into a single number. Like, how fucking dystopian is that? Are we really... do people even really think about this? Do people even realize, like, how far it slid, how far gone things are? Loneliness is a disease. It has chronic mental and physical ill effects, and, like all diseases, it is exceedingly out of the control of those affected by it, especially those with pre-existing conditions. Now, I want to hammer down on this again, even though I've said it before. When coronavirus broke out, we talked a lot about those with pre-existing conditions being at more risk of dying from it. You know, people with heart disease or diabetes, but we don't talk about, we acknowledge, at least some of us acknowledge now, that there's a loneliness epidemic. Obviously the mainstream media and like a lot of normies don't, but we should also acknowledge that that being affected by the loneliness epidemic, getting chronic loneliness, being chronically lonely, there's pre-existing conditions involved. It's not just that, oh, you're short or autistic or whatever, that's why you're chronically alone. No, that makes it more likely, but just it's the same idea as you're more likely to die of COVID if you already have some kind of lung condition. That doesn't mean that it was the lung condition that killed you. It'd still be COVID if you use any fucking common sense. Loneliness is though the only disease that is made to be ashamed of in our society and made fun of. Fuck, even alcoholics are treated better than us by most people. And it's no surprise many FA, forever alone, chronically alone, whatever you want to call it, are addicted. If your default mood is vast emptiness, then of course you'd want to fill that emptiness with liquor. And if somebody is an alcoholic or addicted to whatever, porn or, I don't know, fucking crystal meth, if we really want to go that fucking hard of a route. If somebody's addicted to alcohol, say, because they're forever alone, their disease isn't alcoholism, it's chronic loneliness. And alcoholism is a symptom of that chronic loneliness. And it's no surprise that those suffering from chronic loneliness often fall prey to the snake oil salesman The suffering is so much to bear. We see this same issue with cancer patients. I don't know how many of you have seen those informational things that the government had put out. It's like, beware the cancer quack, a real doctor never offers a cure. We see this. We see these snake oil salesmen prey on people like us. People feel so desperate they will suspend their disbelief and allow themselves to think for a minute. What if it actually does work? What other shot do I have? This is why snake oil salesmen prey on them. What I have here is a miracle elixir I have perfected over the decades of my research. My specialty formula eliminates cancer from the body like no other. Chronically lonely are sold a similar lie. I have created the ultimate dating strategy. Just buy my book. It contains all the secrets. Over my many years of experience, I have gotten so much attention from women using these simple steps. All you have to do is follow my advice and buy my book. And when someone does this, they buy the book or whatever they want them to buy, and it doesn't succeed because of course it wouldn't. Well, it sounds like you need my deluxe package of all lessons starting at only $1,999 per class. I promise you, it is guaranteed to get results. All these people say they've gotten results. Desperation makes people more vulnerable to snake oil, and although chronic loneliness isn't cancer, it still hurts all the time. I won't say, of course, that it hurts as much as cancer. Please don't take this out of fucking context, but our society is one that treats the disease of chronic loneliness as something to be ashamed of, rather than something to offer even a fucking sliver of empathy over. Is it any surprise at all that when people not only feel like absolute shit, feel vast emptiness as their default mood, and then on top of that suffering, are then made to be ashamed of, and made to feel like it's their own fault that they feel like this, that they constantly feel this vast emptiness and can never find a partner? Is it any surprise that some of these people will go out to be the capital I incels? I'm not saying it makes it right for people that are chronically lonely to become hateful towards women and fall into these hateful ideologies, but I'm saying that if you have enough of these people and they're not offered any reasonable explanation that actually explains what's going on, then they'll just go with the explanation that sounds more correct than what the normies are telling them. At least some of them will. They're constantly told it's their fault. We're constantly told it's our fault, one way or another, when we speak about crippling loneliness. Even though it's a systemic problem far wider than the individual, like climate change or poverty. It goes like this: some incel movement person or whatever will approach them with, it's not your fault, and we know that part is true. For the majority of people affected by the chronic loneliness, it's not their fault. But then the second part is, it's actually women's fault, and it's actually a secret plot and whatever bullshit. And they only go after the Chads, and they'll never like someone like you. You're just doomed. Like, this part is obviously BS, but the whole combined argument still sounds more correct than the it's just your fault, lol, just shower or whatever more. It's all your fault, just get out there. To so many of the chronically lonely, the incel when they're offered only the normie argument and the incel argument, well, which one sounds more true? If those are the only two explanations they're offered, which one sounds more correct to a lot of people? Normies may not be able to understand how loneliness can affect people this much, because they take romance and relationships for granted the same way we take having clean water and a roof over our heads for granted. Once you don't have it, you become a lot more desperate to get it. And then you realize how much of a difference it actually makes to not have it, even though you almost treat it like breathing air, and how much you take it for granted. And I'm willing to bet a lot of FA people would probably prefer 7 years of life left with a loving partner over the rest of their lives alone. I'm willing to bet that there's maybe not, even if it's not a majority, I'd bet you maybe 1 in 3 or something would. That's got to be pretty high. Now, this proposition may seem extreme, but Imagine some normies becoming homeless, living under a bridge behind dumpsters or whatever. And then this continues for 3 years or so with no way out in sight. They're offered a choice: 7 years of life left in a decent home, or live the rest of their lives sleeping under a bridge. Listen, let me reiterate again. Loneliness is a disease. One made by circumstances of modern life. And we should start fucking treating it like it's one. We should not treat loneliness as an individual shortcoming. If we treated any other disease like this, we would not be shocked by the resulting mass shootings. And I'm not saying that this excuses those mass shootings, but is it any surprise that some fraction of the chronically lonely will be turned towards the incel movement, and some fraction of those people will go out to commit mass shootings? When you have millions of people like this, it's just a numbers game at this point. And then normies will act like, oh, there's other parts to life outside of romance. But it's so much harder to enjoy those other parts with the constant pain of loneliness always there in the background. And I want to reiterate, because this is more relating to me, this part, but how much chronic loneliness changes people, about how much it changed me even. It's completely changed my taste in music. I used to listen to mostly classic rock, believe it or not. Now, actually, I listen to a lot of Russian post-punk and this stuff called Soviet Wave. You just have to look it up sometime. Now, and why it's usually Russian stuff for me, if you watch my video on what I call honest dishonesty, it talks about the ways that in politics, how lying in politics is done in Russia or in like other ex-Soviet countries and in the Soviet Union and those countries versus how it's been done in the West. And I go over and I compare and contrast them, but the bottom line is I can't really find anything in English that hits the same as some of these Russian artists. Even though I can't understand what they're saying, I can definitely feel it. And the Soviet Wave really stands out in the way it shows the lost future concept. Now, me personally, I feel this lost future twofold. So, a bit of background: I grew up in a really tiny, shitty town in rural Mississippi. Though I was born in 1999, unlike most my age from the U.S. or the West or whatever other countries in a similar level of development, I know what it's like to live in a pre-internet world, because where I was from was some very poor rural area, and I actually didn't even know touchscreens existed until I moved up here. And that was about in 2010. Like, I'd never met anybody I'd never seen one, and I've never met anybody who talked about them, so for all I knew, they didn't exist outside of sci-fi. It was completely different. It was almost like jumping ahead 10 years into the future when I moved. Going off of this, I've always been interested in space, and I watched in elementary and middle school, I binge-watched whenever it was on TV, a show called The Universe. Before the move, I always thought our future was to explore space and expand into space. That's just always seemed like that was where we would be heading from what I was seeing and what I had hoped for the future. And after the move, things slowly started to change, because it feels like I skipped a decade. Like, I got to see the future. I skipped 10 years into the future, and the future sucks. And a common theme in a lot of Soviet Wave is like a melancholy or sadness over the lost future in space, the lost possibilities for that type of future we could have had. And then just the nothing to look forward to. Just almost this like lost greatness. I don't really care about having fucking smartphones or internet if, well, this is all that the future is going to be, and slowly dying of climate change disasters. The other way the future feels lost is knowing I'll probably be alone for the rest of my life. I'm not interested in settling down and all that shit and starting a family. That's fucking boring, if you ask me. I always wanted a partner, an awesome woman to do some my creative hobbies and go on adventures and travel with. It's never been about fucking having kids or starting a family for me. That's never what I wanted. And I now live in a fucking world where we won't expand out into space and all die alone, and climate change is a world-ending problem that it seems like nobody's doing jack shit about, and it's probably... No, it is already too late. Oh, and get this. Guess what my favorite season is? Yeah, that's right, it's winter. You know, the season that's going away because of climate change. And guess where I've always wanted to go? Yeah, that's right, Antarctica. You know, another place that's going to be fucked because of this completely. Maybe this is a bit of conjecture, but I really think a big part of why nothing has been done about climate catastrophe. Calling it climate change at this point, I really think we should call it climate catastrophe, because that's what it is. I think a big part of why nothing's been done about this is because in the short term, for most people, it just means being 50 degrees in January. But, you know, it's not supposed to be fucking 50 degrees in January, you fucking morons. You know, I took a vacation for a camping trip. I purposely went to the west coast of Michigan to get the lake effect snow. It was around 35 degrees the whole time. Maybe one of the nights we got a couple snow flurries. That was it. This is fucking January. And a place that's supposed to be, like, notorious for having heavy snow. And we got nothing. Now, I know that's just like a lot of people would say, okay, you could chalk that up to randomness or stuff, but it's becoming... Even people nowadays, it's like the weather's changed so drastically that even if you just ask people who are like 40 or 50, they'll agree like, yeah, we've obviously been getting less snow. Even I've noticed that. And that's not caring about climate change because, oh, the weather's warmer, that's nice. This seems like a clear case of it's illegal to be weird. You know, this is another thing. I know it's not really related to the main discussion, and you can skip this part or whatever you really want, but winter is always seen as like the default worst season, and snow, you hear this on the TV, they say that four-letter word as if it's just like accepted that those things are bad. And hell, what always stuck out to me as far back as I can remember, one of the common prizes on many of these game shows is like a trip to Hawaii or somewhere tropical. Like, but motherfucker, you couldn't pay me to go to those places. I'm not interested in going to where it's always too hot and too bright. People are like, oh, let's go swimming. Now, how many times do I have to fucking tell you? I don't like water. I don't like, unless it's in solid form. I don't like to be wet. And I don't like hot weather. And I don't like being out when it's too fucking bright to see shit. And, you know, maybe here's where I'd pull my autism card. Like, I know this is a tangent and it's getting ridiculously long, but I just wanted to talk about this especially. Most normies don't even fucking understand what autism is. In my everyday life, like, most people wouldn't even know that I'm autistic, that I have it, but they think of some shit like those dumb skits where they do with, like, obviously weird and like, oh, we're gonna bring them on to laugh at them, haha, funny, like the skits they do on fucking Tosh.0. But asking the question, do you have autism, gives you the same amount of information as if you grabbed a handful of M&Ms from a bag and I asked you, do you have M&Ms? If you just say yes, it doesn't tell me what colors the M&Ms are, what colors you have and don't have, and how many of each colors. Now, like, I know one of the common things with autism is having senses be kind of weird. Like, I can't see during the day without sunglasses, or things get washed out. Like, if you crank up the ISO on a camera, you know, overexposed photo, like, the bright areas just get washed out to completely white, and my eyes hurt, and I have to squint if I don't have sunglasses, and my eyes still hurt. But weird is like is that I can read and draw and shit in conditions that people would say, oh, it's too dim. I have the same issue with loud noises. Like, it's like it being dark and somebody suddenly turns on like the brightest flashlight in your eyes, except just it's the auditory equivalent of that when I hear, like, it's especially when it's been like quiet for so long and I hear some loud noise out of nowhere. And with temperature too, it's you know, that fucking comfy 72 degrees Fahrenheit that everyone is obsessed with. Yeah, I'm fucking sweating constantly in pretty much every building I'm in other than my own damn living area. I'm constantly sweating because they always keep it too damn hot everywhere. Now, returning back to the main point of what this whole damn video is about. And some people say, oh, just learn to be happy by yourself. How about you learn to be fucking happy sleeping under a damn bridge? Others continue with the cult of positivity mantra, with, oh, just get out there, away from us, so we don't have to see the harsh reality of the chronic loneliness epidemic. Oh, it'll happen someday, despite absolutely no evidence for that being the case. Oh, you know, there's a teapot at the L3 point between the Earth and the Sun. Oh, what, you want evidence? Oh, no, you just go check for yourself. All of this is like saying, oh, you're worried about climate change. We'll just drive less and turn the lights off when you're not using them. As if that's actually going to fucking work. Well, we know it's not going to work because it hasn't. They told us that for decades and it didn't solve shit. Now here's what normies should actually do. Don't offer false hope or platitudes. This just makes people irritated, and when they have to tell you how they don't work, it seems like you're just telling them these advices that we all know don't work, at least deep down we all know don't. Even the normies, I think, know that a lot of this advice won't work for us. And they're just saying it just so we have to explain how it doesn't work constantly and make ourselves look like negative jackasses in the process. That's really the reason why a lot of these normies offer this constant advice that factually does not work. Instead of offering false hope or platitudes, and especially do not blame the individual. It's obvious that when you have a huge spike in loneliness, something has drastically changed. People didn't just decide to be stinky and smelly. Again, let me reiterate that again. Instead, maybe say something like, I know that must hurt, and I can't imagine it. I don't think I could have gone on for as long as you have. You're far more resilient than me. Now that statement doesn't pretend to understand. Because again, I really feel like that a lot of these normies, like, to try to explain how this chronic loneliness feels is like trying to explain color to a blind man. You just can't do it. That phrase also doesn't give any vague hope without evidence. No, don't worry, you'll dig up a pot of gold someday. We don't need bullshit like that. It doesn't fix anything, and it just tries to get you to be hopeful with no evidence. And the last part of that phrase at least builds them up in some ways. This one's a bit of a longer one. Maybe hopefully you've enjoyed some vodka or something while listening to this. Well, I'm No Offense signing off. I hope this video gets done soon. I hope it gets as well received as the last one. It's been a while writing this script for this one, figuring out exactly what all I wanted to say, and I went off on a couple tangents again, but, well, I guess I'll see you in another video. You're listening to WFUK LP, the only radio that